William Thatcher had been chasing ghosts for 30 years. As a journalist, he'd learned that the best stories hid in the margins, forgotten ledgers, misfiled documents, the paperwork no one bothered to read. That's where truth lived, in the spaces between official narratives. Today's ghost wore a familiar face. The National Archives basement smelled of mildew and forgotten history. Thatcher moved through rows of filing cabinets, his lantern casting shadows that danced like memories. He was researching Reconstruction policies, the messy aftermath of war that nobody wanted to examine too closely. The nation preferred celebrating victory to confronting the complicated reality of putting itself back together. His assignment was simple: write a commemorative piece about Lincoln's vision for reunification. Standard fare. Safe. Boring.
Then he found the file marked Executive Orders, classified, April to December 1865. Thatcher almost passed it by. Classified materials were above his clearance level, but the filing clerk had made a mistake. The cabinet was unlocked, the folder sitting slightly askew as if someone had hastily replaced it, an invitation for curious eyes. He glanced around the empty basement. No witnesses. No harm in looking. The folder contained routine orders, most of them signed by Andrew Johnson after he assumed the presidency. Pardons, appointments, administrative reorganizations. Nothing remarkable until Thatcher reached a document near the back, its paper slightly different, higher quality, with a distinctive watermark. Executive Order, Most Secret, read the header. The text was brief, almost cryptic. In the event that these United States face existential threat from within or without, and the sitting president is unable or unwilling to act, the authority of this office extends beyond the mortal span of any single man. The president's shadow must protect the nation, acting with full executive power until such threat is eliminated. This order supersedes all constitutional limitations during periods of national emergency. Thatcher read it twice, frowning. The language was extraordinary, essentially claiming presidential authority could transcend death itself. Legal scholars would have a field day with the constitutional implications. But it was the signature line that made his blood run cold. Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, dated November 14, 1866. Thatcher stared at the date. November 1866. 19 months after Lincoln died at Ford's Theater. His first thought was forgery, someone's elaborate hoax or administrative error, but the signature matched perfectly with authenticated Lincoln documents he'd examined for previous articles. The distinctive angular A, the flowing flourish on the final N, even the slight rightward slant that indicated Lincoln's left-handedness. And that watermark? He'd seen it before. It was from a paper mill in Pennsylvania that supplied the White House. Difficult to counterfeit, expensive to obtain. Thatcher's hands trembled slightly as he carefully photographed the document with his portable camera. The flash powder illuminated the basement for a brief second, freezing the impossible signature in silver halide emotion. Someone had either forged this document with extraordinary skill, or Abraham Lincoln had signed an executive order 19 months after he was supposedly murdered. Both possibilities terrified him. Thatcher returned the file exactly as he'd found it and left the archives, his mind racing. Back at his New York Times office, he spread his research across his desk. Photographs of the document, notes on Lincoln's assassination, medical reports from the attending physicians, eyewitness accounts from Ford's Theater. Everything pointed to Lincoln's death being thoroughly documented and witnessed. The president had been shot, lingered for 9 hours, and died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15,
1865. His body lay in state, was viewed by thousands, and buried in Springfield, Illinois.
Except now, Thatcher held evidence suggesting otherwise. He needed verification, not from official sources. If this document was genuine, official channels were compromised. He needed someone who'd been there, someone whose testimony couldn't be questioned. Dr. Charles Leal, the young Army surgeon who'd been first to reach Lincoln after the shooting. If anyone could confirm the president's death was genuine, it was Leal. Thatcher found him at a military hospital in Brooklyn, still treating veterans 2 years after the war ended. Leal was barely 30, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much death.
Mr. Thatcher, I've given dozens of interviews about that night. I'm not sure what more I can tell you. I'm not asking about the shooting, Doctor. I'm asking about the body. Leal's expression shifted slightly. What about it? You examined President Lincoln. You pronounced him dead. How certain were you? Absolutely certain. I checked for pulse, respiration, pupil response. The president was deceased. Could you have been mistaken? No. Leal's voice was firm, but something flickered behind his eyes. Uncertainty? Fear? Mr. Thatcher, why are you asking these questions?
Thatcher made a decision. He pulled out the photograph of the document. Because I found evidence suggesting Lincoln signed an executive order in November 1866. Leal went pale. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, then stood abruptly. You need to leave. Doctor, leave now and destroy that photograph. For your own safety. What are you talking about?
Leal grabbed Thatcher's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. There are things about that night you don't understand, things that must remain buried. If you value your life, drop this investigation immediately. He practically pushed Thatcher toward the door. As the journalist stumbled into the hallway, Leal added one final warning. Some men die twice, Mr. Thatcher, and some truths kill anyone who speaks them. The door slammed shut. Thatcher stood in the empty corridor, his heart pounding. Leal's reaction confirmed his suspicions. The doctor knew something that terrified him even 2 years later. Back in New York, Thatcher locked himself in his office and began cross-referencing everything. Government records, newspaper archives, personal accounts. He was looking for inconsistencies, gaps in the official narrative. The body that lay in state, viewed by thousands, had been heavily embalmed, and the casket kept partially closed. Viewers saw Lincoln's face, but never the full body. The man who embalmed Lincoln, Thomas Lynch, had died in a mysterious fire 3 months after the funeral. All his records were destroyed. John Wilkes Booth's diary, recovered after he was killed, had 18 pages torn out. The missing pages were never found or explained.
And there were rumors, whispered stories among Washington insiders about a shadow government operating behind President Johnson's administration, decisions being made by unknown hands. Policies that seemed to anticipate threats before they materialized. Thatcher compiled everything into a file he kept hidden in his apartment. The more he dug, the more convinced he became. Abraham Lincoln hadn't died at Ford's Theater. He'd staged his death and continued operating in secret. But why? And for how long?
The answer came 3 weeks later, when Thatcher received an unsigned letter at his office. The message was brief. Mr. Thatcher, your investigation into historical inconsistencies has been noted. If you wish to understand what you've discovered, come to Washington, alone. The Willard Hotel, room 301, midnight, December 15th. Come armed if it makes you feel safer, but come alone or you'll never learn the truth. It could be a trap, probably was a trap.
But Thatcher had spent 30 years chasing truth. He wasn't about to stop now. He bought a train ticket to Washington and a revolver he barely knew how to use. If Abraham Lincoln was somehow still alive, Thatcher was going to look him in the eye and demand answers. The truth he had learned long ago was worth dying for. The Willard Hotel stood like a monument to power in the heart of Washington. Thatcher had stayed there before, covering political stories when the war was still raging. Back then, the lobby buzzed with generals and senators making backroom deals that shaped the nation's fate. Tonight, at 11:30, he was nearly empty.
Thatcher climbed the stairs slowly, his hand resting on the revolver in his coat pocket. Room 301 was on the 3rd floor, away from the main guest rooms. A location chosen for privacy, or for disposing of a nosy journalist without witnesses. He reached the door and paused, listening. No sound from inside. He knocked twice. "It's unlocked," a voice called from within. Thatcher's breath caught. He knew that voice. Every American knew that voice. High-pitched, slightly nasal, with a Kentucky accent softened by years of legal training and political speeches. But it couldn't be. That voice had been silent for 19 months.
He pushed open the door. "Close the door, Mr. Thatcher. We have much to discuss and limited time." Thatcher closed the door with trembling hands. The figure turned. Abraham Lincoln looked older, grayer, lines carved deeper into that craggy face, but the eyes were the same, sharp, melancholy, carrying the weight of impossible decisions. He wore civilian clothes, a simple black suit that made him look like a prosperous merchant rather than a president.
"You're dead," Thatcher whispered.
"So I'm told." Lincoln gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Your legs look unsteady." Thatcher collapsed into the chair, his mind reeling. How? Why? The shooting was witnessed by hundreds, was real. The bullet was real. The blood was real. Lincoln touched his head where a faint scar was visible through thinning hair. But death? That was theater. Necessary theater to accomplish what a living president could not. Which is?
Saving the nation from threats it doesn't know exist. Lincoln sat across from him, moving with the careful deliberation of someone perpetually in pain. "You found the November document. That means you've been thorough. Dangerous combination in a journalist. Intelligence and persistence. You signed an executive order 19 months after you supposedly died. That's not thoroughness. That's basic arithmetic." A ghost of a smile crossed Lincoln's face. "Fair point. The document was careless. Edwin insisted I needed something in writing. Official authority for what I was doing. I argued it was too risky. Apparently, I was right. What exactly have you been doing?"
Preventing the next war. Lincoln stood and moved to a table where maps were spread out. The Civil War ended the question of secession, Mr. Thatcher, but it didn't end the conflicts that caused it. Foreign powers still circled like vultures, waiting to tear pieces from our weakened nation. Domestic conspiracies fester in the South, and now— He paused, his expression darkening. Now threats emerge from unexpected directions. "You're being cryptic."
"I'm being careful. You're a journalist. Your instinct is to publish. Mine is to protect." Lincoln turned to face him fully. "Do you understand what would happen if you printed what you know? That Lincoln faked his death and has been operating in secret?" Thatcher had thought about little else for weeks. The government would be delegitimized. Johnson's presidency called into question. Every decision, every law, every treaty signed since April 1865 would be contested. Constitutional crisis, possible civil war.
Precisely. The cure would be worse than the disease. Lincoln's voice was gentle but firm. "I died so the nation could heal. Revealing I'm alive would rip open wounds that have barely begun to close. So you want me to bury the story, protect your secret? I want you to understand the choice you're making." Lincoln returned to his chair, movements careful.
The bullet wound clearly still troubled him. "You're an idealist, Mr. Thatcher. I've read your work. You believe the public deserves truth, that democracy depends on informed citizens. Noble principles. I share them. But sometimes truth serves tyranny better than freedom. If you expose me, enemies of this nation will exploit the chaos. The British still want to see us divided. Confederate hardliners dream of resurrection. And there are others." Lincoln's expression grew troubled. "Others who would happily watch democracy collapse if it served their interests." "Who?" Lincoln studied him for a long moment, seeming to reach some internal decision. "Tell me, Mr. Thatcher, what do you know about the men who financed the war?" The question seemed like a non sequitur. Bankers, industrialists, railway magnates. They supplied the Union Army, made fortunes from government contracts. And now the war is over. What happens to men who've tasted that kind of power and profit? Thatcher frowned. "They go back to business." "Do they?" Lincoln pulled a folder from his coat. 3 weeks ago, Secretary Stanton's agents intercepted correspondence between 5 of the wealthiest industrialists in the North, men who control steel production, railways, banks. Do you know what they were discussing? I assume business matters?
They were discussing how to control the next president, how to ensure that whoever sits in the White House protects their interests above all others. Lincoln's voice hardened. "They're planning to buy the government, Mr. Thatcher. Not through crude bribery, but through systematic corruption, campaign contributions, media control, strategic appointments. Within 10 years, they aim to own the presidency completely." Thatcher felt cold. "That's insane! The public will never know. That's the genius of it. No coups, no violence, just money flowing through legitimate channels, drowning out any voice that opposes them." Lincoln handed him the folder. "Read it. Names, dates, amounts. Evidence of conspiracy to subvert democracy itself."
Thatcher opened the folder. The documents were detailed. Coded letters, financial transfers, meeting notes. Names he recognized jumped out. Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Morgan. Men who were pillars of Northern society, heroes of industry who'd helped win the war. "This is why you faked your death," Thatcher said slowly. "Not just to stop foreign threats, to fight domestic ones. A living president has constitutional limits. A dead one has none." Lincoln's smile was grim. "I can operate without oversight, without political constraints. I can do what must be done to preserve the republic, even if it means betraying every principle I once held sacred." "That's terrifying." "Yes, it is." Lincoln leaned forward. "Which brings us to your choice, Mr. Thatcher. You can publish your story, expose me, spark a constitutional crisis that these industrialists will absolutely exploit, or you can help me stop them. Use your position at the Times to investigate, to gather evidence that can be used when the time is right. Be my eyes in New York, where the conspiracy is centered." Lincoln's voice dropped. "I'm asking you to become what I became. A ghost. A man who works in shadows because the light has become too dangerous."
Thatcher sat back, his mind reeling. Everything he'd built his career on, transparency, truth, public accountability, was being asked to step aside. But Lincoln was right about one thing. Exposing the president's survival would create chaos, and chaos served the enemies of democracy. "How do I know you're telling the truth? About the industrialists, about everything?" "You don't. That's the nature of shadows. You never know what's real until you step into them." Lincoln stood. "But I can offer you this. Come with me tomorrow. Meet Secretary Stanton. See the evidence with your own eyes. Then decide." "And if I decide to publish?" Lincoln's expression was unreadable. Then you'll have made your choice, and I'll have made mine. But I hope it doesn't come to that. The nation needs honest men, Mr. Thatcher. Even if honesty sometimes means keeping secrets. Thatcher looked at the folder in his hands, evidence of conspiracy, proof that the war's victors were planning to betray everything they'd supposedly fought for. If this was real... "Tomorrow," he said finally, "I'll meet Stanton, but I'm not promising anything beyond that. I wouldn't expect you to." Lincoln extended his hand. "The meeting is at noon, War Department. Tell the guards you are there to see Thomas Wainwright, my current alias. They'll show you to Stanton's office." Thatcher shook the hand. It was warm, calloused, real. Abraham Lincoln was alive. The implications made his head spin. As he reached the door, Lincoln spoke again. "Mr. Thatcher, the document you found, do you still have the photograph? In my office safe? Burn it. Not because I'm ordering you, but because if the wrong people see it, you'll be dead within a week. These industrialists play for keeps." Thatcher nodded and left, his mind churning. He walked through Washington's dark streets, past buildings where laws were made and broken, where men played games with the nation's future. Somewhere in those buildings, a dead president walked, and somewhere in New York, powerful men plotted to strangle democracy in its sleep. Thatcher had come to Washington seeking truth. Instead, he'd found something far more complicated. A choice between the truth that destroys and the lie that protects. By the time he reached his hotel, he'd made his decision. Tomorrow, he'd meet Stanton. He'd see the evidence, and if Lincoln was telling the truth about the industrialists, William Thatcher, champion of transparency, was about to become a keeper of secrets. The War Department building looked like a fortress. Appropriate, Thatcher thought, for a place where secrets were weaponized and truth became ammunition. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying the impossible conversation. Abraham Lincoln, alive, asking him to betray everything journalism stood for. Or was he asking Thatcher to serve something higher than journalism? The question had kept him awake until dawn. "I'm here to see Thomas Wainwright," Thatcher told the guard. The soldier's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition of a code phrase. "Third floor. Last office on the left. Knock twice. Wait for acknowledgement." Thatcher climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched before him. The last door stood slightly ajar. He knocked twice. Enter. Edwin Stanton sat behind a massive desk covered in files. The Secretary of War looked exhausted, his beard grayer than photographs suggested. Next to him stood Lincoln, now wearing different clothes, a businessman's attire that made him nearly unrecognizable without context. "Mr. Thatcher," Stanton gestured to a chair, "Abraham tells me you're a man who values truth above comfort. Rare quality, dangerous quality." "I'm a journalist. Truth is my profession." "Was your profession." Lincoln's voice was gentle, but firm. "What you become after today depends on what you see and how you respond." Stanton pulled out a thick folder. "What you're about to see is classified at the highest level. 3 people alive know the full scope. Myself, Abraham, and 1 intelligence operative. You'll be the 4th. Once you see this, there's no unknowing it. Show me." For the next hour, Thatcher read. Letters between industrialists, coded but decipherable. Financial records showing massive funds being moved through shell companies. Lists of politicians already compromised. Senators, congressmen, governors. A systematic plan to control American democracy through economic leverage. The scope was breathtaking. These men weren't planning a coup. They were planning something far more insidious. A slow transformation of government into a tool of corporate power. Elections would continue. Democracy's forms would remain. But substance would hollow out, replaced by an oligarchy wearing democracy's mask. Carnegie calls it rational governance, Stanton said bitterly. The idea that men of wealth and vision should guide the nation because the common people can't be trusted with complex decisions.
It's aristocracy, Thatcher said. Everything we fought against, repackaged for industrial age. Precisely, Lincoln leaned forward, and it's brilliant because it's gradual. No single moment where citizens can point and say, here is where we lost our freedom. Just slow erosion, decade by decade, until one day Americans wake up in a country that looks like a republic, but functions like a plutocracy. Thatcher felt sick. How advanced is this? They've already begun, Stanton said. The 1868 election, 2 years away, will be their first major test. They're backing candidates in both parties, ensuring they win regardless of outcome. Ulysses Grant is their preferred choice for president. War hero, popular, and politically naive. Perfect puppet. Does Grant know?
Of course not. That's the beauty. He'll genuinely believe he's serving the nation while serving their interests. Lincoln's expression was pained. Good men will be turned into instruments of tyranny without ever realizing it. Thatcher absorbed this. What can you do? You're legally dead. You have no authority. I have whatever authority I can seize. Lincoln's voice hardened. I can sabotage their financial networks, expose key conspirators anonymously, feed information to politicians who'll fight them. It won't stop the conspiracy entirely, but it can slow it down, give the nation time to develop defenses. And you want me to help?
I want you to be my voice in New York, Lincoln said. These industrialists operate through newspapers they control. The Times is independent, for now. You can investigate, publish stories that seem unconnected, but expose pieces of their network, corporate corruption, political bribery. Nothing that reveals the full conspiracy, but enough to make them vulnerable. And in exchange, I bury the biggest story of the century, that Lincoln lives. Yes, Lincoln didn't flinch from it. You become complicit in the lie. You betray your principles to serve a greater good. Welcome to the shadows, Mr. Thatcher. They're cold and lonely, but necessary.
Thatcher stood, pacing. Everything in him screamed to walk away, to publish what he knew, to let truth take its course. But Lincoln was right about the consequences. Chaos would serve the industrialists perfectly. They thrived in disorder. I need a guarantee, Thatcher said finally. What kind? Someday, this story gets told. Maybe not now, maybe not for years, but eventually the American people learn the truth. About you, about the conspiracy, about everything. History deserves honesty, even if the present requires deception. Lincoln and Stanton exchanged glances. When? Lincoln asked.
When you're really dead, and when the industrialist conspiracy is defeated or exposed, then I write it all. Everything. The faux story. Thatcher met Lincoln's eyes. That's my price. For silence now. Truth. Later. You'd trust me to honor that? I could simply eliminate you once you've served your purpose. You could, but you won't. Thatcher smiled grimly. Because you're still Abraham Lincoln. Still the man who believed government should be of the people, by the people, for the people. That man doesn't murder journalists for inconvenient truths. Lincoln was quiet for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Agreed. When I'm gone, truly gone, and when the threat is ended, you publish everything. Letters I'll write, documents I'll preserve, the full story. You'll be the historian of shadows.
Thatcher shook his hand. Then I'm in. God help me, I'm in. Stanton looked relieved. There's a contact in New York, a banker named Samuel Morse. No relation to the telegraph inventor. He's trustworthy, feeds us information on industrialist activities. He'll be your connection to us. What's my first assignment?
Andrew Carnegie is hosting a charity gala next month. Major donors, political figures, newspaper owners. You'll attend as a Times representative. Watch, listen, report. These men believe they're invincible. That arrogance will be their weakness. Thatcher nodded, his mind already working. I'll need the photograph destroyed, the document I found.
Already handled, Stanton said. We retrieved it from your office last night. Professional courtesy. We picked your lock rather than breaking the door. You broke into my office? You broke into classified archives, Lincoln pointed out. Let's call it even. Despite everything, Thatcher almost laughed. The absurdity of the situation hit him, bargaining with a dead president about breaking and entering. One more thing, Lincoln said as Thatcher prepared to leave. These men we're fighting, they're not cartoon villains. They're patriots in their own minds. They genuinely believe concentrated power serves the nation better than messy democracy. That makes them more dangerous than simple criminals.
Because they'll never question their own righteousness. Exactly. They'll do terrible things believing they're saving America, just as I'm lying to millions believing I'm saving America. Lincoln's expression was haunted. The line between savior and tyrant is thinner than anyone admits. Don't let me cross it, Mr. Thatcher. If I become the thing I'm fighting, you publish everything immediately. That's not a request, it's an order. Thatcher studied the tall figure before him. Still recognizably Lincoln, but transformed by 19 months of shadow work. How much longer before the man disappeared entirely into the role? I'll hold you to that. I'm counting on it.
Thatcher left the War Department feeling like he'd signed a contract with the devil. Except the devil wore Lincoln's face and spoke of preserving democracy. He'd come to Washington seeking truth and leaving as a co-conspirator in the grandest deception American history had ever known. The train back to New York departed at sunset. Thatcher watched Washington disappear behind him, the Capitol dome glowing in fading light. Somewhere in that city, a dead president plotted to save the nation from itself. And somewhere in New York, powerful men plotted to own that nation completely. William Thatcher, idealistic journalist, was now William Thatcher, keeper of impossible secrets. He'd write stories about corruption and power, never mentioning the conspiracy's full scope. He'd live with the weight of knowing democracy hung by a thread, protected by a ghost.
But someday, when Lincoln was truly gone, when the battle was won or lost, he'd write the truth, all of it. That promise was the only thing keeping him from drowning in moral compromise. The train rattled northward through the darkness. Thatcher pulled out his notebook and began writing. Not the truth, not yet, but pieces of it, fragments that would matter when the full story could finally be told. Somewhere ahead, in the glittering, corrupt heart of New York, industrialists toasted their inevitable victory. They didn't know a ghost was coming for them, and they didn't know that ghost had just recruited a witness to history.